Hi everyone, my name is Nicolas and today I'm going to talk about what's new in the Android Studio design tools. So you may remember the design tools about, a few years ago with the introduction of the layout editor in Android Studio 2.2. But if you have not checked the design tools since then, let me cover a lot of what we've been doing. And it is a lot. So we release new tools in various releases of Android Studio, like the navigation editor or the resource manager, new libraries as well that helps you creating your applications like constraint layout and motion layout. So with this, we essentially build all those different tools, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what we did in 3.5. In 3.5, as you may know, the focus was to work on Project Marble, which was explicitly not, a feature release, but we focused on improving the performances, the stability, the overall quality of the product. And that had a tremendous impact on those design tools because by definition, they are visual tools. They tend to use a lot of memory. They tend to be really CPU intensive because we do a lot of complicated work. So all this work in 3.5 pan out in the subsequent releases. And specifically with the resource manager, the navigation editor, and the layout editor, we finally got a proper ecosystem of tools that really work together. So it's not just one tool. You can really, take your entire projects and work with it in a visual way. Since then, we released Android Studio 3.6 with a lot of new features and refinements. So in the layout editor, for example, we added the new split mode, which essentially allows you to see both your XML or your layout editor at the same time in a split mode. And let me show you how it works. So this is the layout editor that by simply clicking on that icon, you'll get your text view on the left. And contrary to the preview window, the preview panel that we used to have, this is actually the full-blown layout editor. You have all the panels of the layout editor are available, all the actions are available, and you can see me here playing with those panels and see the changes being reflected straight into the XML. So again, this idea of being transparent on what we operate upon. Another thing that's pretty convenient is that this split view mode applies to a lot of design tools. And here's an example in the navigation editor. And you notice here that the selection in the text reflects into the visual portion in the navigation editor. So again, the idea is to make it a lot more easy to understand what those tools are generating. And because at the end of the day, those tools, those generated files are what you are using in your project. Specifically in the navigation editor, we did a couple of things. One, we moved to the new attribute panel, and that actually brings you a lot of nice benefits. It's the same panel as the layout editor, which means that you got autocomplete, so you don't have to think about when you type new stuff. You have lint errors being surfaced into the panels with warnings. You can go back to the declaration and etc. In 3.6, we added a lot of refinement in the resource manager. First, we added much more support for new resources. So you can see your different menus, you can see your fonts, you can see even your translation strings, and all of that in a very visual way. So it's a lot easier for you to navigate across your resources. We also added a better support for importation of resources. So you can import durables or colors or even fonts. And essentially, we try to streamline this workflow. We also support filtering those resources because now that you can see a lot of resources in your project, for complex project, obviously, that can be quite a lot of things to wade through. So now you can very quickly add filtering so that you can see and find your resources in a lot more straightforward way. Here is a quick example on how all of that works. So first, I can literally copy and paste straight into that, but we also support drag and drop. And you can see essentially that the resource manager really works hand in hand with the layout editor. Another example is the integration with the new resource picker that builds up upon the resource manager. So again, the idea is to make it a lot more straightforward for you to navigate through your assets and pick the right ones. And that brings us to Android Studio 4.0 that we just released. And we are really excited about 4.0. We are really interested into what you're going to build with it, specifically for the design tools, because we added a lot of new things. First, in the layout editor, we improved on the split view user interface, so it's a lot easier to figure out and snappier. So, can't resist to show it to you again. Look at how fast that is. So it's really, really fast to go between your text, the preview, or the full designer. We also support the material icons in a much more straightforward way. So thousands of icons in different themes, and all you have to do now is to create a vector asset, and you'll get a panel showing you all the icons. And you can select the different themes and search for them, and it's really convenient. And in terms of new toolings, we added the motion editor, which is a brand new graphical editor to create motion. And here is a quick example. I cannot resist to show you how it works, where I can start with a basic constraint layout that shows me my screen, and I can go and convert it into a motion layout, just like that. And now we got two states, a start state and an end state. And I can go, click on them, and do some operations. So here I'm just going to just modify something a little bit, adding some properties, and you can see that if I toggle to the transition mode, I'll see that my text that was invisible and is visible in the end state is now automatically changing. And if I do some more interesting operation, like changing the size of an element, you'll see that everything is correctly interpolated. And you can go scrub around the timeline so you see what's going on, and you are in full control of how you want your animation to be done. So in Android Studio 4.0, we also added a new layout validation tool. And that allows you to see at a glance how your layout is going to behave on a variety of form factors, like tablets or landscape and portrait and things like that. And that panel can stay live and open at the same time as you edit your layout. So you have immediate feedback when you do changes. We also support a color blindness simulation mode to check that your UI works well for everyone. We also support different size visualization for the system font. So you can check that your layout handled that correctly as well. And finally, we allow you to create your own set of configuration that you want to check your layout against. So another tool we added in 4.0 is the Layout Inspector. And the Layout Inspector allows you to connect directly to your running application and inspect it. So here is how it looks like. You got this screen. I can just go select elements. You see it reflected on the component tree on the left, and you'll see the values of the different attributes on the right of the element I'm selecting. I can also pivot that entire view in 3D to see how the different elements are related to one another, and if elements are overshadowing others. That's really, really convenient tool. We also support attribution of those values, and that is a game changer. That means that I can go on my running application, select a specific element, for example, that green background, and find out where that green comes from. And in that case, that file is already open. I can go in the file, change the color, you'll see it reflected into the preview, and apply changes live to the running application, and I'll see the result. Now, let me talk about 4.1. So we introduced a lot of new stuff in 4.0, a lot of big major features. But in 4.1, we didn't stop. So we continued to refine those tools. And while there is no huge features, standalone features, we really made many improvements in those existing tools. Let me talk to you about the custom view preview. So if you ever tried to create a custom view, you probably wanted to test it in the layout editor. And to do that, it's a little cumbersome, right? You have your actual code, and you need to create an XML file that's going to instantiate that custom view you just did, and then you can visualize it. So it's a little bit not as frictionless as what we would like. So in Android Studio 4.1, we are bringing a live custom view preview directly in your code editor. And let me show you a little bit. What I mean by live is that everything works. You can even resize your component. If you compile the code, you'll see the changes being reflected directly. So it's a very, very useful tool when you are developing custom components. The layout editor has its content of new features as well. First, we introduced a much nicer way of setting the visibility attributes. And it's nice because not only it allows you to set the visibility that you know, but it's really easy to set the tools visibility. And the tools attributes are attributes that are only applied while you are editing stuff in the layout editor. So it's great if you want to have or test a set of values that works when you're editing your layout, but that may not be the same one that you're using on your real device, like visibility. So it's really easy to check the different behavior this way. We also added a lot of new features to make using the constraint layout helpers a lot more straightforward. So first, we added them into the palette. So now you've got the list of the different helpers that we provide, and it's as easy as dragging them onto the design surface. You can also use the right-click menu to create those same helpers. And what's nice with it is that if you select a bunch of widgets, we'll automatically add them in the helper as references. So here it works. I've got this bunch of widgets that are all over the place, and I just would like to organize them in a nicer way with the flow helper. So I can just select them, right-click, create a flow helper, and that's it. They are all going to be properly laid out. And because flow is a normal widget, I can just position it as usual. Here are a couple of constraints in the parent. And what we support now as well is showing you the different elements that are referenced in that constraint helper in that top right panel. So it's easy for me to then add new elements to that flow, as well as editing that flow. So we have a brand new panel to edit the different attributes of the flow, so you don't have to guess which attributes exist. You can just go and edit them like that. But again, you have an immediate validation of what's happening. And that reference panel in the top right allows you as well to reorder the elements or delete them, or in addition to add them. So it's a lot more convenient to use the constraint layout helpers in 4.1. So if you have not done so, I recommend. The tools toggles is, as I mentioned, with the visibility tools attributes. You may have attribute that only applies when you edit the layouts in the layout editor. But that means that sometimes you may miss something that you will only find out when you deploy a device. So that tools toggle remove those tools attributes when you edit, and you can toggle back and forth between having them or not. So it's very easy to, in a quick way, check that everything works well without having to deploy to your device. We also added a bunch of keyboard shortcuts, and so it's now in the normal property panel, the settings panel for Android Studio. So it's easy to create new shortcuts and modify them and set those shortcuts that you do want. We added support for a new drawable picker straight in the code editor in the Gunner. So you can simply invoke it like that, and you can navigate through the existing drawables, select them, and will replace the code straight away. We improved the support of the vector assets. So as I mentioned before, it's now really easy to access them. Now we make sure that we download the latest version, so you don't have to go to the website. Those are the current icons. So I cannot resist to talk a little bit about our efforts with accessibility and improving that for your application. So in a future release, we are going to have a direct integration with the accessibility check library. And by simply clicking on that top right button, you'll be able to run all those different checks. So here is a quick example. You see that the different errors appears in the error reporting panel, and those are accessibility related errors. So there's a lot more that we want to do there, but it's something that we are really keen on, and I think it's going to make your applications a lot better as well. The navigation editor in 4.1 has a few improvements as well, with a new component tree as well as support for some of the latest development in the navigation library. So let me show you the component tree first. One thing that you now can do is actually show the entire tree of components. It's not a flat list anymore. So it's very easy to go hierarchically in your file, navigate in subgraphs, etc., etc. And if you want to create a deep link now, not only it is possible, but also we support additional checks and validation. So it's a lot easier and faster for you to create those links. So in 4.1, we also added a lot of new features in the motion editor. Specifically, new visualization for the reference in your key position. We also added panels for better using the transforms on your views. Here is a quick example of that panel. So let me select that view, and there's a couple of views, one over another. I can simply go into the panel and straight see the action of rotating in the attribute panel, and you'll see it replicated in the design view. So very easy and very interactive. Another thing we added is a better transition panel. So it's a lot easier to change and tweak those parameters, and specifically the easing curve is now immediately accessible. Here is an example of everything together in 4.1. So you notice here in that file, I have different states, and I can go and click on the different states. If I go into a transition, I can play it, and I can see what it looks like directly. But now I can also go and select a specific element, and check what the value are for example, for the rotation. And if I want to tweak it, it's just there. So I can tweak it and immediately see what's the result of that modification. And that brings us to Compose and what type of tooling we are going to support in Android Studio. Bear in mind, this is just a preview. A lot of that is being worked on as I'm talking, but we are really excited about it. So the first thing that you'll find if you're trying Compose is we show you a preview of your layout straight next to your code. A little bit like what we do for the custom view. You can see the immediate result of what you're typing. Here is a quick example. So you can see that I have my different composable functions, and each one of them can be represented in the preview. I can also go and navigate by simply clicking on those elements. One thing that's also pretty nice is that it's super easy to create new previews. So here I just copy and paste some preview code, and I can just customize it as I want. So another tool we're introducing for Compose is the interactive preview. So what is that? So you'll see those little icons on the top right of your preview. You can go and activate them, and when it's there, you literally can interact with your layout without having to go to the emulator, without having to deploy your application to your device. And it works. So we think it's going to be a really convenient tool that's going to make your life a lot simpler. Finally, one of the nice things that we added too is the ability to straight away publish that composable or push that composable on your device. So by just having this little green arrow close to your composable, we essentially are packaging that composable as a single activity that we push to the emulator or to the device, so that you can see straight away how it works or how it behaves on a real device. So to wrap up, we talked about a lot of tools. You may know design tools are just the layout editor, but it's much more than that. The navigation editor, resource manager, and as well as all the new tools we just introduced in Android Studio 4.0. The motion editor or the layout inspector are game changers. And of course, we could not resist to show you what's coming up with the Compose today.